Hello, everyone. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. It's great to have you with us for another episode of the show. As always, our host, my friend and colleague, is here with me, Jeanne Marie Nevada.
Liz Owen.
Hello. I didn't want to pop up for a second. I'm like, don't leave me alone.
It's because it's tired. It's almost the end of Pride Month as we record this, and I think everything is just a little rainbowed out some days.
I know. Even StreamYard is like, I've had enough.
They've like you've overstayed your rainbow welcome, people.
Never.
There is no too much rainbow at PFLAG.
And there's another 11 months where LGBT people exist. It is shocking how they're there all year long.
Wait, do you mean I don't just sit in a box for 30 days a year and wait for this to happen?
That's it. You get
like
another 11 months.
Issue solved, Liz.
Well, have a wonderful show. You have great guests today.
Oh, I'm so excited for today. So thank you. We will see you later, Liz.
Sounds good.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jeanne Marie Nevada, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. I can't speak anymore, apparently. Every single week, we try to get together and talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And today we are talking about a really fabulous topic and something particularly close to my heart, which is PFLAG's history. And the reason that we are having this conversation is because of an upcoming book that is about to be released in just a couple of months. And it is, in fact, about our founder, Jeanne Manford. And it's called Mother of a Movement, Jeanne Manford Ally, activist and co-founder of PFLAG. And we have the author, Rob Sanders, with us today. And we're going to talk about the book, how it came to be, what is going on with it, how you can use it. But we also have one of PFLAG's very longtime friends, Eric Marcus, with us to talk about some of the context for Jeanne Manford, her husband and her son and her whole family, and what PFLAG actually means to the LGBTQ movement. So let me tell you a little bit about our two guests today before I bring them on. First, we are going to have Rob Sanders with us. He's a former elementary school teacher, so God bless him for that, who writes funny and fierce fiction and nonfiction. He has a very long list of publications under his belt, including Stitch by Stitch, Cleve Jones and the AIDS Memorial Quilt, Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag, Stonewall, a building, an uprising, a revolution, and peaceful fights for equal rights. He lives in Florida. But we also have our friend Eric Marcus with us, and Eric is the author of a dozen books, including 2 editions of the book on history, which is Making Gay History, and the podcast of the same name. He's also written Why Suicide, Breaking the Surface, which was a #1 New York Times bestselling autobiography of Olympic diving champion Greg Louganis. He's also co-producer of Those Who Were There, a podcast run from the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust testimonies. And he is the founder of and chair of the Stonewall 50 Consortium. So Eric's clearly not doing a lot. We see that. But anyway, let me bring both of them on to talk about our book and PFLAG and history as we wrap up another Pride Month. So welcome, Eric and Rob.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having us. And Rob, I love your books. Absolutely love your books. They're wonderful.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you for your work, which inspires me and informs me all the time.
It's great.
I have to say, Rob, I actually saw proofs of the Jeanne Manford book the other day as I was prepping for this, and I got so excited. I had seen some of your other books, but this by far was the one I think that excited me the most. So I'm so glad that you could be here. I'll admit I never thought I would see it. There it is. I don't even have my copy. It's gorgeous. The art is gorgeous. The background is gorgeous. I want to talk about how it came to be and also how to use it, because I think it's fascinating and it's such a great story that every single time I find that we tell it, people get excited. So I am thrilled that you have done this. So I just want to start with you, Rob. There are tons of children's books written, and there are certainly a lot of them done in the LGBTQ space. Where did the idea for this book come from, and what was your connection to Jeanne Manford?
And I will say, and thank you for your kind words about the proof, and illustrated by Sam Kalda. We have to say that because that's what makes a picture book, are the illustrations, which were so lovingly done and historically accurate, which is
yes.
Well, of course I had heard about Jeanne, but Jeanne wasn't on my radar as far as a book went initially. And actually nonfiction wasn't on my list in my radar when I first started writing children's books. But when I was researching Pride, which was my first nonfiction, and then Stonewall, during that process, I discovered lots of other stories I wanted to tell. And practically every book that was kind of chronicling history of the movement had that wonderful photo of Jeanne marching in the 72 Christopher Street Liberation Day Parade, carrying her homemade sign. And that picture alone was inspiration for me, because I had a mom, so I could relate to that, and I knew kids couldn't. And I was a teacher, just like Jeanne was a teacher, and kids can relate to teachers. And I found teaching that kids really resonate with things that are not just. They know and recognize injustice. And they're often incensed by it. You know, on the playground, it's obvious it's not fair, or the rules change in class. You didn't do it that way yesterday. And when they see someone being treated, historically see someone being treated unfairly, they are hooked and want to know more about that. So the fact that Jeanne stood up for her son and protected Morty when he was the victim of a hate crime for just expressing his concern about his community, that I knew that would hook kids and they would want to know more about this story and this woman who was just a quiet little petite school teacher.
Yeah. I have to say, as I was flipping through and looking at the pages, I did notice how close some of the images in there actually were to the photographs that I had seen. And it was so exciting to see some of those things. But I think you're also right. I think the refrain that keeps coming back in the book, the being like Jeanne, it's so relatable. She was not somebody who was clearly born to be an activist. This was not where she started, I don't think. And I think that makes it so relatable. So Eric, PFLAG's been around a long time. We're almost 50. I always like to say we don't look a day over 35. But you had the chance to interview both Jeanne and Morty and Jules and several people related to PFLAG's founding. Do you think, and I'm always interested to ask this, that they had any sense that what they started back in 1972 and a little bit before that would turn into what it became today?
By the time I interviewed Jeanne and Morty, and Jules was dead by the time I met them, they did have a sense, because it had grown by then to be a huge organization. And Jeanne discovered from that first time she marched in the Pride March in 1972 how passionate people were about their parents and the importance of support from parents, because she said people cheered and they screamed. She thought that they were cheering for Dr. Spock, the child psychologist, who was standing behind her in the Pride March in 72. But they weren't. They were cheering for her because of that sign she carried. Parents unite in support of our, parents of gays unite in support of our children. And she said people came up to her and kissed her and said they wish their parents would support them the way she supported Morty. And that's how the idea came about. So I don't think they'd be surprised. I do think that Morty in particular would be surprised at how their story has survived. Jeanne told me when Morty was dying in 1992 that he was concerned no one would ever remember his contributions to the movement. So he became president of the Gay Activist Alliance when he was in his early 20s. So I get to tell his story as well in our podcast. But his work with PFLAG, or the creation of an organization that evolved into PFLAG, could have been lost too. Yeah. So I felt an enormous responsibility when I interviewed the two of them to tell their stories in my book and then later in the Making Gay History podcast. And I'm just thrilled that Rob is now telling that story yet again for a young generation of kids who really need to know about how a school teacher didn't have an impact only on her students, which I'm sure was an enormous impact, but also on the world. And she managed to change the world, just one person. And she was a regular person.
And I think that's the most exciting thing about her story. And I find it fascinating when you say that Morty was concerned he wouldn't be remembered. I always found it really interesting. I didn't particularly see his name a lot. And then I read your book many, many years ago, and I got to read the interviews with him. And then you start seeing him pop up and you realize Morty Manford was everywhere in the beginning of the founding of the movement. And I think that's one of the saddest things that it doesn't get included, which was why, Rob, I love the fact that he was very prominent in the story.
Right. And there's even a little mini biography, like a one-page biography about Morty in the back matter, because that's so often the case when I write any story. For instance, when writing about Cleve and the AIDS Memorial Quilt, well, Gert McMullins was a huge part of the quilt. She's the mother of the quilt. And so to not mention her and not tell something in the back, it was like the only opportunity maybe in a children's book for her contributions or for Morty's contributions to really be lifted up. So thank goodness for back matter, where we can add some of those additional rich content for kids.
I especially enjoyed the back matter, to be honest with you, as I sort of read that and I want to talk about that in a couple of minutes, but it wasn't just the story. It then gave story behind the story and how to use the story, which I think is one of the best things. So Rob, Jeanne has a lot of stories. She was a teacher. She was a parent. She was a mother to 3 kids. A lot of people focus just on Morty, but certainly there were other children. And then she was the founder of PFLAG. So how did you go about writing her story? And there's a lot of pieces to what Jeanne did while Morty was around, and then even what happened after he passed away. So how did you decide which pieces were most important for you to include?
Well, yes, and so much is important. It's really a slice of life story, and it really begins with the attack on Morty is really where the story begins, though we have a little bit of pre-story establishing Jeanne as the mom and the teacher. And the book tries to set up the premise that, moms behave in different ways. Some moms do this, some moms do that, but this is what Jeanne did. Some teachers do this, some teachers do that. This is what Jeanne did. And when we had that established, then it was, we were in the place to begin to tell this story of the unusual but normal things Jeanne did to respond to the injustice she saw. Writing a letter to a newspaper was a huge deal for a mom of a gay son at the time, but it's a simple act. Making a sign is a simple act. Walking side by side with someone is a simple act, but she was doing all these things at a time when it was an unusual act. And that's why everyone was cheering, I guess, Eric, right? No one had seen it before.
It was a first time, yes. And one of the things that I learned about Jeanne not so long ago in talking with her daughter, Suzanne, was that she had an older son, older than Morty, who died and who they believe took his life. So when I've been asked what I think motivated Jeanne, she was already a fierce mom. She was devoted to her children, but she wasn't going to let anyone take another child from her. And she wasn't going to let anyone step on her son, Morty. I was so fond of her. She was so quiet and so soft-spoken, but you didn't mess with her kid.
I just love that about her. And I love the way you've both talked about this. It was these simple acts. It was writing a letter. It was making a sign. It was walking alongside your kid that were not at all simple. But I think if there's one big lesson of PFLAG, it is the power of showing up. I mean, we literally started with a mom showing up for her kid, which at the time, kind of unusual, still can be unusual depending on where.
There was so much stigma at the time that for a parent to stand up and say, my kid is gay, I'm the parent. It was at a time when people still blamed parents, especially mothers, for the fact that their boys turned out to be gay. And Jeanne she just rejected all of that. She loved her child. This is who he was, and she was going to protect him.
And she did it. I think a lot of people don't realize it wasn't just the stigma. There were consequences back then. I remember reading someplace, and maybe it was in some of your stuff, about how when she was doing that initial letter, speaking to the principal at her school, and this awareness that her activism, as it was seen, could actually be a problem for what she did for a living.
She was called into the principal's office, and she said, essentially, this is my business, not yours. Butt out.
Yeah.
So it's another lesson about you can't tell a book by its cover. Jeanne, and I think that was also part of what made Jeanne so powerful, was that the person you saw, you didn't expect that from Jeanne. So she was really quite subversive.
She was. I love looking at that first photo where she's carrying the sign in the Pride March in 1972. The thing that always makes me laugh, and I think I've mentioned this to you, Eric, she's carrying a shopping bag. Like, it's like the most average mom thing. Like, she was on her way to do grocery shopping, but stopped to go to the parade. And it's so every day. And yet that is what that moment is so powerful for.
Yeah. Jeanne Marie, how many chapters are there now of PFLAG?
Oh gosh, we are somewhere hovering around 400.
Yeah, I think that might surprise Jeanne Manford. But yeah, it's from that simple act, which I think is a lesson for all of us, that by showing up, that it's not someone special necessarily. What we do might turn out to be special, but that it's just regular people change the world.
Right. Doing what you can do, whatever you're equipped to do. And I think that's such a great lesson for kids too, is that you don't have to be an NBA star or a TikTok star or anything. You just do what you can do where you are, righting the wrongs you see.
You can even be a children's book writer.
Exactly. My superpower. It's my superpower.
Yeah, because look at what you have done in bringing these stories to children. I didn't see these stories when I was young. It would have been transformative for me to know that there were heroic figures who were people like me, or moms, so I could hand that book that you've just written about Jeanne to my mom, when I'm in elementary school, and say, look at this incredible mom who supported her kid, and I'm just like that kid too. Mm-hmm. So you have great power.
It is huge power. And I think, when we're teaching people and they say to us, how do I talk to my kids about this? I have little kids. Every single time, the first thing out of my mouth is children's literature. There are so many great stories. And Rob, you're totally adding to that, which actually kind of perfectly dovetails into something that I wanted to ask you about. So the book is being published under an imprint of the American Psychological Association. And given the moment that we are at, this did not get by me. I thought it was really interesting. So how did this come to be? And do you think it's important to have this connection to the APA, especially given what is going on in the environment around us?
I think there's something special about having this connection with the APA. And Magination Press is the imprint, the children's imprint, and they have a long history of publishing LGBTQ content for kids. I think it goes all the way back to Gail Pittman's This Day in June. I think that may have been the very first book that they published, and one of the very first, if not the first, nonfiction kind of book. We had, like Leslie and Newman's Heather Has Two Mamas, kind of fiction things, but nonfiction where you realize these are real people. Not people that might be like me, but these are real people. So Magination Press, we'd already published Stitch by Stitch, the Cleve Jones story, with them. And so my agent just, when shopping this story around, Magination Press was just on the list of publishers it went to. And they really wanted to publish this because of they saw the connection with PFLAG and how important it was to lift up that organization and partner and make parents aware. And I think that the fact that this is with APA, it just kind of helps to remind people that publishers and authors and teachers and librarians don't have all these ulterior motives. We're trying to deliver information and history in age-appropriate ways for kids. And knowing that the APA is doing it should give some credibility, I would hope. Maybe not to everyone, but I think that it does lend, some credibility to the purpose.
I totally agree. I have to say, as you saw me twisting around, because I always keep This Day in June near me. I mention this book all the time to people as one of my favorite books. When people say, where do I start explaining Pride? I'm like, I actually don't care what age you are. This is kind of the best place to start. It's such an excellent book. So Eric, this book is coming out at a time, and we've talked to you about this in the past, where we're seeing more books for young children, particularly around LGBTQ themes. At the exact same time, we are seeing this enormous push towards censorship and the removal of books from especially school libraries, depriving kids who need it most of these very same books. What do you think all of this means at this moment? Is it significant that this book is coming out? Is it significant that this push has continued? And where do you see this battle going right now with the censorship?
Yeah, I've been around long enough now to have seen a number of these waves throughout my life. When my first book was published, The Male Couples Guide, there were a number of places where there were attempts to ban the book. I thought it was the most innocuous book possible about ideas, how to hang pictures without hanging your partner. That was about, it was just a guide to living together. But in Muscatine, Iowa, they tried to ban the book. The librarians, of course, wouldn't let it happen. I think we see these waves over and over again. The challenge for the anti-gay and anti-trans folks now is that kids have access to the intertubes or the internet. They find this stuff. And for example, the Brooklyn Public Library here in New York is waiving its fee for kids to get digital books. So by naming these books, by saying we want to ban these books, you're actually signaling to kids the books that they really want to read.
Yes.
So the kids aren't fooled, but the key is to stand up and where we can to fight back and say this is wrong. And this is where librarians have been key allies, not just now, but in decades past, to keep these books on the shelves and to make sure kids have access to them either at the library itself or through the internet. But this just reminds me so much of the late 70s and the anti-gay campaign initiated by Anita Bryant, which she called Save Our Children. So here we are again, all these years later. The difference now is that so many more people know someone who is LGBT, at least LG, if not T. And what we see now is the focus is on trans people because most people don't yet know trans people.
Right.
So so the people who are leading this campaign are very cynically using the weakest among us, those who are known the least, and in some ways the most vulnerable, for political gain. Most of them aren't. They know better. They really know better, which makes this all the more sickening. Kids will find these books. So it's an important moment for Rob's book to be out there and for Jeanne to be featured because she's such an important figure for all people to know about.
I agree.
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes when these banned book lists come out or the things that are being banned, I feel like it's almost here's the list of books you need to read next.
Yes.
I almost treat them as my reading lists at this point, and
Yes.
I wonder which ones of them I've missed. So I'm sure it's not just me, and it probably is the kids too. Rob, you've been doing children's books a while. This is not new for you. How does this moment see as you look at it as an author actually producing the content at the same time that all of this censorship and pushback is happening? What kind of perspective do you get from that?
Well, I mourn for my friends who are still in the classroom. I retired early at the end of 2020, and it has become a very difficult place to work, and not just because of book bannings, but that's certainly another level or layer on top of them. So it's very difficult, and it's very difficult for librarians, even those in not just school librarians, but public librarians. They just face all kinds of harassment and people who come in thinking they have a pornography section because their books, it's just crazy. But from the time Pride was released, the question I'm asked the most often in different ways is, why do you write such controversial books? That's kind of the bottom line. And the very first time I was asked that question, a thought just flitted in my head, and it has been my response ever since. And it is that I don't write controversial books. I write history. And to not teach history would be what is controversial. And if we can ever get people realizing that history is not anything to fear, but it might be something that causes us a little shame or guilt or concern, but we can live with that. Some parents have recently said, well, I don't want anything happening in the classroom that might be uncomfortable for my child. Well, as my sister who used to teach middle grade math said, well, that leaves math out because math is constantly uncomfortable.
Agree.
So, we just have to be willing to let history be history, and to tell it and to teach it and to learn from it.
Yeah. And I think the most ironic thing when we see these book bans is that it is the ultimate proof that we have not learned from it.
Right.
That it is quite literally history repeating itself. It is this cyclical nature, although I feel like sometimes for everything we can say positively about the internet and what it has done for access, I think that it has also made the spread of bad information related to these topics light speed. And I think that's frightening.
You know, the most famous book burning, the one that we've all seen in the black and white photo in 1935 in Nazi Germany in Berlin, there's that pile, it's film, that pile of books being burned. That was actually Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld's library from his institute, his Human Sexuality Institute in Berlin. He founded the first gay rights organization in 1897. So we're fighting these battles now. They were fought before, and generations ahead of us will be fighting these battles too. The key is to not give up, because the haters will always be there, and those of us who are championing history and the need to tell history need to step up and be there too.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that. I was updating one of our history classes that we do, and I actually added that very photo of that book burning, because I had seen several that we had seen current day, and I thought, what a frightening thing. And I'd also grabbed some of photos of Anita Bryant's campaigns and what happened, and how close even the images looked to what we are seeing exactly right now. It is, in some ways you get comfort because you think we survived that, and in other ways it just gives you pause to think we survived that, and yet here we are once again. Right. So Rob, how would you hope that people are going to use this book? Obviously it's entertaining. I so enjoyed sitting down and reading it on Friday. But how do you think people can use this book? Maybe parents and kids, or families and kids. What are the other ways that you're hoping to see it out there?
I love Eric's idea that I could really see this as a book that a child could take home and say, hey, I want you to read about this mom, as a bridge to saying, I'm that kid, you know. I would also, I love when I was just at an event Saturday and saw parents sitting around reading my books with kids, you know, just like you would read any other book about any other historical event with your kids. And I would like to think that teachers and librarians could use it as a read aloud, as history studies in October, or as I always said as a teacher, I couldn't use any book to teach any standard. If I want to teach sequence of events, if I want to teach character development, if I want to teach writing strategy, I could pull things out of a book, not even read the whole book, but just use it to illustrate the point that I'm teaching today. And thus kids have exposure to a text they might be interested in, and they can go pick it up on their own. And so I just hope teachers will continue to use books as teachers know how to use books.
I love that point too. It doesn't just need to be about this conversation. It's a great book. It's a beautifully constructed book. The illustrations, there's so much going on in the background in some of the images. I thought, what a conversation you could have that could take you down so many historic rabbit holes. And I mean that in the most beautiful, perfect way ever. But I think there's a lot there. So we are getting very close on time. So I want to make sure that people can both find you. Eric, can you let people know how they can learn more about Making Gay History and the work that you're doing? And then Rob, I'd love to hear how people can track you down too.
Yes, you can find Making Gay History at makinggayhistory.com or wherever you find your podcasts. And also on our website for each of the episodes, we produce essentially a magazine article and include archival photographs and lots of links to additional information. So for the Jeanne and Morty Manford interview, you can dig deep, or you can just listen to the episode. And we have a separate episode from Morty Manford as well. So
yes, I wish we had a little bit more time to talk just about Morty. I think we need to have a separate conversation about him completely, because there are so many stories there. And Rob, tell people how they can track you down.
You can find my books anywhere you buy books, online or in person. They can get them for you. And my website is robsanderswrites, WRITES.com. And you'll see all my books there and how to contact me and other things as well.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, Rob. Rob, congratulations on the new book. I can't wait to actually have my copy. Eric, thank you as always for being with us and for everything that you do.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye. Well, everybody, I realized I didn't mention that we did have an article this week, although we changed it up a little bit. Our article, if you were interested in learning a little bit more about this week's conversation, is actually a link to one of Eric's podcasts, which is an interview with Jeanne and Manford. And if you go to straightforequality.org/discussion series, you can grab that. Sorry, I'm so excited to get into the conversation, I forgot. We will be back next week with another great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. As we remind everybody at the end of every single episode, we hope that this week you are going to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, please be kind. If you need any help, visit us at pflag.org/find to locate your local PFLAG chapter. And until next week, take care of yourself, and we will see you again.